He was born on June 27th. He was due on September 8th. He would be 41 weeks if he were still inside. But he's nearly 3 months old. We're not sure which date to go by, but I guess like legally his birthday is June 27th. So.
Or he would be about a week old if he had come when we thought he was gonna. Yeah. But I think he's just really eager and, you know, anxious to be here. So he came early.
We went to Necker Island, which is this really cool private island, and just like really awesome getaway. We had the most wonderful week, the most amazing people there. We were kayaking. I was huge and pregnant, just entered the 3rd trimester, starting to get a little uncomfortable, my feet starting to swell, and then it was the final night. We were going to leave the next morning, and we had this great dinner, went to bed. 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly, and there was water everywhere, and I thought, I don't know what happened. I knew it was a state of emergency. I woke up Lucas, like, what do we do? I don't know, what do we do?
Nearest anything outside of this small island was a 25 or 30 minute speedboat ride away.
Bumpy speedboat ride for someone whose water just broke. They didn't want to release us from the hospital because it was dangerous to travel, because what if we were to have him in transit? But we felt like the risk of having him there was worse than the risk of traveling. So we managed to get them to agree, and we took a medical evacuation flight to the nearest level 3 NICU, which is a NICU that's prepared to deal with really early babies, and that was in Fort Lauderdale. Got to Fort Lauderdale and stayed there for 9 days. And then as time went on, we could tell that it didn't look like I was at risk of going into labor anytime soon. So we decided we want to get back home. We want to go to Canada. We were then taken straight to the hospital, where within 12 hours at the hospital in Canada, they said, you don't need to be on bed rest. You can go home, relax. We'll send a nurse to check on you every day. It was really amazing just to be back in our own element and have our own food, and we very much enjoyed those days.
Those 4.5 days.
Yeah. The night before that night, I didn't sleep much because I was just crampy and thought, well, maybe this is a 3rd trimester thing.
But definitely not contractions.
No. 9 p.m. on Friday night, and I looked at Lucas and I was like, these cramps, they're really... Hold on 1 minute. Yeah, they're really strong. And then, yeah, it was just a whirlwind from that point forward, because we knew at this point I'm 29.5 weeks, so it's better. It's a lot less dangerous. But we also knew if I go to the hospital and I'm not in labor, they're going to keep us there. So we knew like our life, normal life at home, had come to an end, whether that meant we were about to have a premature baby or whether that meant we were going to be in the hospital until the baby comes. He had been in a frank breech position, and for a premature baby to be frank breech, it's a really dangerous delivery. So we knew that if he was still breech, we would have to have an emergency cesarean. By the time they checked me, I was dilated to a 4, and he was in a breech position, so it was like, okay, things could move really quickly. We have to get you on the operating table, which was just very disorienting in the middle of having contractions. So I was on the operating table, epidural in, still in shock that all of this was happening, and, you know, really just didn't know what was about to come. Was constantly checking to see where Lucas was, and they allowed him and Jessica to come into the room within seconds before they cut me. From my perspective, I couldn't feel much in my body. I just feel this tugging, and then suddenly you hear him cry, and it's just so surreal.
Yeah.
And so awesome, because we knew that if he cried, it means he was breathing, which means he's better than he could be.
Yeah, his lungs were working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then within a couple of minutes, they were pulling him out.
and he came out crying, so it was fine. So they were able to keep the cord intact for 90 seconds, which prevented a future blood transfusion, which is awesome.
They took him to a little warm quasi-incubator, and I went with him. His feet were by his ears, and so his legs stayed up like that with his feet by his ears.
For about an hour?
All the neonatologists and all the doctors were there waiting just to assess his breathing, and after a minute they felt that he was working really hard, so they intubated him. They're at most risk of respiratory conditions when they're premature. He couldn't cry anymore because of the tube. He couldn't emit any sounds, but they brought him next to her, and she saw him, and then they took him, and I went with them to the NICU, and that's where they were trying to straighten him out to measure him 41 centimeters or so, because he wasn't fully straight, and they weighed him
3 pounds 12 ounces.
3 pounds 12 ounces. Antibiotic thing in his eyes, so his eyes were closed and wet, and it was a strong sight, to say the least. He was red because
he was so red for a few weeks.
His skin was still kind of translucent, and he got a lot of blood, thankfully, with the placenta.
The first time I saw him was in the operating room, and it was really emotional. Just amazing that he was okay. Yeah, I think the hardest part was my instinct was to have him with me, and I couldn't. And even when he was in the NICU for the first few days, we couldn't touch him. We couldn't hold him. We couldn't be there. So that was really hard. The first few days, I would just stand there and cry, like staring at him, singing to him, putting my little finger in, but I just couldn't stop crying. But then, with time that got easier, and it started to be clear that he was fine, and he was gonna be fine, and he was doing great, and we were just so appreciative of the medical care, and that.
Yeah, so that was the beginning of a long
64 days in the NICU. But we would come home to sleep and pump and eat, and it was like our hearts were in the NICU. Like we just constantly felt this pull of wanting to be back there, and so we would do everything as quickly as we could so we could get back.
So anyway, we brought him home.
It's just that feeling of walking down the street with him, and almost at first felt like we're gonna get in trouble for this. Like we're not allowed to take him. Definitely took some adjusting to, but was the most incredible thing in the world. Having a wireless baby.
Manuelita vivía en Peguajó, pero un día se marchó. Nadie sabe bien por qué. A París ella se fue. Un poquito caminando y otro poquitito a pie.